Hello, everyone, and welcome in another English One podcast. Today's guest is Mr. Austin Stout. Hello, sir.
I'm good. How are you? Where you
I'm very
guys?
fine.
What time is it there right now?
It's almost 6 p.m.
Okay.
Yeah, we have like you said like a 6 hour difference or something like that. So
Yeah.
so
Yeah, I do
this-
quite a bit with different consults and coaching and stuff with UK and more recently and Poland, Denmark, a bunch of areas really. So I'm trying to learn all the time zones.
it's for me. Every time I try to set the call, and someone's just give me the name of their time zones. I am confused just because I don't even know how to search for the discrepancy between me and the guys I'm gonna speak with. So it's always a struggle. So many times I fuck it up. This is why I've always like a text the guests previous and ask something like, "Are we seeing each other in two
Yeah,
hours?"
20
Yeah, just
minutes.
yeah,
We're
20
good.
minutes or something like that. Just because previously I am writing down that it's gonna be 7 p.m. But actually
Yeah,
no, it's 6 p.m. So
six
so
six hour gap.
yeah,
Poland? Are you in Poland?
yeah, I'm in Poland. Yes.
Yeah, 6 hours. Yep. Yep. So I
Yeah.
had two consults in Poland on Monday, actually.
Oh,
So
great.
for whatever reason, and then we'll get into the questions so we don't stretch it out too much. But for whatever reason, I had a gentleman from Poland reach out to help with his digestion, and ever since then, he has just been referring me person after person after person. I have probably done 15 consults in Poland in 2024.
I am so curious
This is
about
crazy.
who it was. Probably I know him. Maybe it's even one of my clients or something like that. Just because previously I sent a bunch of my guys to a GI test. So maybe not
Um,
speak it aloud, just because maybe he is not wanted to. But after the podcast, I will definitely gonna ask you
yeah,
for that.
he does.
Yeah.
He does jujitsu.
Oh, so definitely not.
Yeah, so
I am not
I
gonna.
don't think it's your guy, but
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So today we are meeting just to pick up your brain, just because probably everyone who's watching this podcast knows you, but if not, this their fault. I am not gonna introduce you just because you were on so many podcasts introducing yourself. That's probably so fucking boring for you. So if they want to know more about you, they can find you by the name of Austin Stout on the Instagram, and probably gonna find every links to your social
yep.
medias and stuff like that. And if they type your name on YouTube, it's gonna be a bunch of the podcasts. Almost all of them is about the GI
There's a lot of
problems
them.
and stuff like that. I don't know why. I know why, just because you are great with it, but you are a very good prep coach. And today we are meeting just to pick up your brain about about competitors. Just because,
Yeah.
yeah, today we're probably gonna get only through the off season, just because we are
Okay.
not having enough time. But just pretend that I am your client, okay? And I am currently weighing about 100 kilos, so it's gonna be 220, something like that in pounds. And we wanted to make me super heavy. So
Okay.
open, we go in open.
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm right after my show, and let's say it's my blood is perfect. I am doing something, some sort of health phase or whatever. Doesn't matter if you believe in that or not, but I've done it myself, and I am in a perfect position. My body weight is low, and every metabolic parameters are great. So my fasted blood glucose, my fasted blood pressure, stuff like that. Everything's fine. Okay.
Mhm.
So I am coming with you like a clear blankets.
I love that.
What?
Well,
Yeah,
first off, I appreciate us talking about competitors because I everyone's like, "Will you come on and talk about
that was
digestion?"
annoying. If
I'm like, "Yeah, I will. I can, but
I try to watch everything with you just before this podcast
yeah,
to not like asking you the same questions, obviously.
yeah,
And there was even on the title there was nothing about the GI, and then the podcast was about the GI,
I
and
know.
next podcast, and the same situation every time.
Yeah. So it's a great. I like this. I like this setup. So we have a scenario, right, that we can kind of work with. So a couple things that I would want to look at first is I'm we're in a great position. You're also lean, right? You should be pretty
Yeah.
lean, pretty insulin sensitive. So we have a lot of runway to work with here, right? I mean,
Yes.
when I say runway, we should theoretically we should be able to stretch this out over months and months and months and months, continue to grow because body composition is good, insulin sensitivity is good, food's probably not that high yet, right? Digestion's good, all these things are good. So what I want to think about is how can we continue to progress over the next 8 months, 12 months potentially? Because I think a mistake a lot of people will make here is they're looking at bloods check out. Let's send the dose up to full tilt right away, right?
Yeah.
And you know what? And that method works, and we've seen people do it for decades, right? But inevitably, there's a few things that will stop a growth phase. And I always tell people, I'm like, what are the two or three things that would stop a growth phase? So you get too fat is one. Maybe like when you get too fat and insulin resistant. Two is that you can't eat anymore. That's digestion issue, right? And three is that from a health perspective, you're getting kind of worried because the bloods look really, really bad, you know? So
Yeah.
you gotta pull back down. So I want to be able to manage all three of those possible variables for as long as possible. That way we aren't cutting ourselves short. Muscle growth is a slow process. So I would rather keep you in a state where you're getting repeated stimulus for 8 months instead of only 4 by just blasting you straight up. So I would want to look at, what are your peak dosages that you've used in the past? I can kind of get an idea of like what you've needed from an androgen standpoint to accomplish that. Um, and then I need to look at from like androgen and estrogen ratio standpoint, kind of figure out where where you're going to operate best. I may start you. We're probably going to start bumping the dose, titrating up slowly. I may start you around 50% or so, or 30 to 50% of what that peak dose might be. So that's a starting point. That's plenty to start pushing the growth as we increase the food. We should be able to grow on that relatively long before we need to titrate again. Because the other thing is post prep, body weight's low. You probably haven't regained all your strength back, maybe that you've had in the previous off season. So you should be able to get stronger and progress with a pretty small amount of stimulus, right? Theoretically. Um, so I would want to give us like the minimum effective dose there, which would might be an increase up to 30 to 50% of that total dose. And then beyond that, when we're looking at training, this gets very contextual, of course, when you're looking at when you're looking at like the training piece and the nutrition piece. Go ahead.
I'm just gonna say that already everyone loved that just because you started from the PEDs and everyone just waiting for it always to the
That's
end.
why I did it.
Yeah, maybe
I know what people want here.
yeah, you started with a training. So maybe I start to ask you a question just because I am come prepared.
Oh,
So
just do that. Go ahead.
yeah, yeah, just because I know you can talk probably about that for an hours, but we're gonna set it up in a blog. So we start from the training through the diet and then the PEDs, the cheat meals and
Yeah,
stuff like that. Okay. So yeah,
absolutely.
so how do you set up my training during the off season? Are you liking to focus more in on a volume side, or maybe like a less volume but more frequency, or just intensity and volume and stuff like that?
So if you if you're 100 kilos and you want to go up to the next weight class, I'm assuming that you already have a good amount of muscle.
I'm 5'7".
Okay, so you already have a lot of
Yeah.
muscle, right? Which tells me if you already have that much muscle tissue, I'm probably going to have to kind of start specializing the training to bring up weaker body parts, right? So we have a good base already. So I really what I need to do is kind of a physique assessment, you know, at that point, do we need to bring up your arms? Do we need to bring up your delts? Do we need to bring up your hamstrings? Like what is it that we need to bring up? And then I can start setting up the first block of training. As far as the volume and intensity goes, I want to take into consideration what your recovery capacity is. What's your job like? What's your, you know, sleep like? What's your relationships like? Because the thing is, if I work with a 22-year-old that has a part-time job that has no responsibilities, and I work with a 30-year-old who has two businesses and a wife and kids, you can see like recovery capacity on those two people is drastically different. Just because the outside demands, the outside stress is so much higher with the 30-year-old sample versus the 22-year-old, right? So
Yes.
I need to take into consideration like what is your recovery capacity? Personally, when we're setting up as far as leaning towards, volume, high, low intensity, I generally fall somewhere in the middle most of the time. I'll just say that. I don't really subscribe to and I'll say I've done everything. I'm in bodybuilding for 17, 18 years. So I have literally done the DC template, traditional 3 days a week, AB split. I mean, I've done it, right? I've done the high volume. I've read the research. I know Brad Schoenfeld's research. I mean, yeah, they do 50 sets and studies. Like, I get it, right? But I also understand that application and the fact that people don't live in a bubble, right? And psychologically, people also have preferences, which I do think is important. And they don't study that. There is no there's really no psychology implemented into the research either. So when I say I fall somewhere in the middle, I normally start somewhere in the middle, but I may actually adjust that based on what I see. So I would like to probably use a combination of stimulus, meaning some straight sets and some probably like cluster sets or intensifiers, drop sets, things like that. You're advanced. So the thing I think about when you're advanced is you're strong, right? You use high loads in the gym, probably large amount of weight. You probably require, if you're going to do something like a compound multi-joint movement, it requires more warm-up sets. It requires a lot of bracing. If you're doing RDLs with 5 plates aside and 6 plates aside or something crazy like that, I mean, there's like 4 warm-up sets, all the bracing that it takes to get into position with that. So exercise selection is going to be really important because I'm probably not just going to have you do all multi-joint movements in there because you're going to blow your CNS out in 1 week, right? And that's a lot of the time why you see more of these advanced guys start pushing towards, braced movements, machines, cables, things like that, because they can actually drive more stimulus to that target muscle without, you know, shaking and wasting a bunch of energy, essentially. Um, so if we're looking at muscle groups, let's say we need to bring up your arms. Cool. We'll just use that.
Yeah.
Bis and tris need to come up. So our first specialization phase is going to be bis and tris, probably. We'll start there. We're probably going to run pretty close to, on your best muscle groups, we'll probably run pretty close to just a bare minimum maintenance volume, which could literally be, that could literally be like 3 to 4 sets even in a week for some muscle groups. Like if your quads are really good, your hamstrings are really good and they just never go anywhere, then we may just run 3 to 4 sets on those, right? If your pecs and delts and back are kind of somewhere in the middle, maybe we're in the range of like 6 to 10 sets a week on those, just for maintenance. And then we're probably going to run like double or even triple the amount of volume potentially on the weak muscle groups, right? And that's just kind of that's like a very rough outline. Um, with the arms being a smaller muscle group, we can probably get away with a little bit more. It might be kind of difficult to do 24 sets of quads in a week just because they're so big and there's so much, recovery involved. But once we kind of have that laid out, then we have to figure out how we spread that out throughout the week, because everyone wants to know like high frequency, low frequency,
Mhm.
so on and so forth. I normally go a little bit higher frequency usually, just because from a recovery capacity, if you do run a specialization phase or prioritization phase, it's just going to be a lot easier to recover when we're spreading those 20 sets out over 2 or 3 days throughout the week. And I also look at it from a performance standpoint. If you did 20 sets of biceps in one workout, by the time you get to set 10, the performance is going to be it's going to be trash, right? I mean, your buys are going to be so wiped out that you're going to be doing 5, or what would like 2 kilo dumbbell curls because there's nothing left. So we can do smaller amounts spread throughout the week to keep performance high also.
Great. Could you explain the specialization phase, or I don't remember how do you call it? Just because I would like to know how you structure your training. Just because, to be honest, I don't believe in periodization in training for hypertrophy, or like hard, hypertrophy. Yeah, let's say it like that. It's yeah, just because in bodybuilding in general, just because I believe that peaking your performance in bodybuilding is not exist, because you don't have like a date of meet or something like that, like in power lifting or something like that. So you should be progressively going with your sets, reps, weights, tempo, whatever makes the training harder and bringing you up the novel stimulus to your muscle throughout the whole off season. So it's not like, for me, it's not like we are doing 8 weeks of this and then 8 weeks of that. It's slowly getting up throughout the whole off season. So what is the specialization phase?
Yeah. So when I say phase, um, it sounds like I'm periodizing it like you would do an 8 week
Yeah.
block. And I don't, and I know some people do prescribe it that way. They'll say, hey, we're going to do a
Like Mike
specialization of,
Israel, for example.
yeah,
Yeah.
we may say we're going to do a specialization of arms for 12 weeks. I don't really run it that way. I generally base it on biofeedback. Are we still progressing? Are we still recovering? My deloading or extra rest a lot of the time is programmed based on need more than
Yeah.
anything.
Me
I
too.
mean, I can see it. I can see it when we need it. I think if you're a newer coach or if you're a newer bodybuilder and you don't have any idea what you're looking at, or you have like a tendency to like run yourself into the ground, maybe you could use a timed phase just to keep you from doing too much. But I think if you know how to read biofeedback and you're training progressively, like you said, weight and progression doesn't have to be poundage. Tempo could be tension,
Yeah.
right? Volume could be tension. I mean, all those things are progression. You're going to know when you need it. Now, when I say specialization or prioritization, I'm kind of talking about like a more advanced bodybuilder tends to they know like these muscle groups are weak and they require a lot of effort to grow. Everyone knows what those are. Like by the time you've trained a while, you're
Yeah.
like, man, my damn triceps will never grow, you know. So it might be a muscle that requires a specialization. So what that basically means is that the stronger muscle groups are being trained at closer to maintenance, right? And then what needs to come up is going to be trained at a higher volume, higher intensity, so on and so forth. And the reason for that is just because you only have so much recovery capacity, right? So you're
Yeah.
allocating more of that towards the weaker muscle groups. And the stronger you get, the bigger you get, the more advanced you get, or the closer you get to your genetic ceiling, it takes more and more stimulus to grow, right?
Yeah.
So, we talk about, if people like terms, they talk about, minimum effective dose, maximum recoverable volume. I don't really use those terms that much, but it makes it easy to explain in the
It
sense
says
that,
in the application, says like that. Yeah.
yeah, I think that when you think about it, though, the minimum effective amount required for a new trainee to make progress, I mean, that's like way over here. It takes hardly anything.
Yeah.
And their maximum recoverable volume is still over here. So like anything in here is going to work,
Yeah.
right? But for an advanced person, I mean, here this is still maximum recoverable volume, but your minimum effective dose is like here. So you only have this much space to work with, right? So
Yeah.
you have to do a lot, but not too much. And there's only that much space to work with. So progression inevitably will be slow.
Okay. Yeah. The phrase phase just get me off the road just because I
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
like you are doing it like a 6 weeks blocks or something like
I
that.
generally don't.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Okay. So when it comes to the diet, I would I wanted to ask you like a more general question just because do you believe in no, first of all, for me, let's stick it to the template. So for me, would you like me to keep leaner, or you believe that like a classical bulking would be something for me that will be actually beneficial just because I probably need to add like a 20 pounds of muscle to be competitive on a stage.
In your scenario, again, being that you are a little bit more advanced, you need to add a lot of tissue, but at the same time, I think I over the years, I have gotten away from the more classical bulk, especially with my again, like more advanced trainees. And the reason for that is simply because it's usually going to cut our off season short. You're going to get too insulin resistant. You're not partitioning nutrients well. Usually digestion goes to shit at that point, you know. So, and the other thing is, again, you're you're really the like lean body mass to fat gain ratio is terrible. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
you gained 5 pounds, but four and a half of it was fat or fluid, or fluid glycogen, whatever. Um, so I would still probably err towards the side of managing the pace of gain. Like I can literally work, say, like, once you've, not right after the show, because you're gonna gain weight quick. Let's say like once hormones have stabilized, once food has kind of reached a higher point, we might be looking at something like if we want to look at it in kilos or even percentages, let's say that we're looking at around, if you're 100 kilos, maybe like 1% of body weight per month, or even less potentially. Once, and again, this isn't right after the show because weight's going to go up quick.
Of
This is
course.
like when we've progressed further into it. So that might be what, 1 kilo, 2 kilos a month, even. I mean, if you're gaining 4 pounds a month, are you gaining a pound a week of muscle tissue?
Yeah.
Probably not. I mean, that'd be great,
Yeah,
but
of course.
not right. And again, like the androgens and everything escalating are going to skew that number. But I'm more so, I want to make sure I'm looking at biofeedback cues. I want to make sure we have just enough hunger to eat. I don't want you hungry, but I need enough to where you're not dying every day and you're not like puking up acid. You don't have like acid reflux and you're
Yeah.
puking. Like I gotta keep you right on that edge. And then beyond that, are we progressing in the gym? Are we not eating so much that we're actually hindering training progression? Are we not taking so much gear that we're hindering
Yeah.
training progression? Um, are we not eating and taking so much gear that we're hindering sleep? right? So I want to make sure that those parameters are in place. And as long as they are and weight is going up, you're going to grow.
Great. But do you believe that for example, people who are just starting out, like a classical bulking, let's explain what classical bulking is. It's getting your calories in a very big surplus, and sometimes even not from the clean sources, but more like a cheat meals and like a fun foods and stuff like that. So would you believe that for someone who just started out is probably natural and stuff like that, it could be beneficial, or you still keep those guys kind of leaner?
I think you can go a little bit bigger with a surplus. Now, I probably am not going to prescribe to the get super fat
Yeah,
side of it, but I definitely think you can probably go a little bit more aggressive with a surplus. And what we mean by that is if this is maintenance calories and you're more advanced, maybe you're only this much over. But if you're newer, maybe,
yeah,
and the reason is just because we know that when you're newer, every stimulus is novel and you're going to grow and you're going to grow super efficiently. So you might actually be able to utilize that. You probably don't really have any limitations at that point. You're going to be able to train, just get strong, eat in a moderate to high surplus, and you're going to grow. Um, Plus, the other thing is, I don't really like with a lot of newer people. I think mentally as well. I like to keep things very simple for them in the sense that I want them to be able to just focus. I want them to have all the energy and feel great and be ready to train and perform every day. I don't want them to be like focused on this minutia of like, oh, I only gained 0.25 pounds this week. I'm like,
yeah.
I don't want to worry about it. Go
It's not
perform.
fun. Yeah, it's not fun. I remember myself when I started, and it was just fun. We were just lifting heavy, and then
Yeah.
everyone's just after the gym goes to the store and buys something like a frozen pizza with a ham or something like that, just to have the protein because it's ham on the pizza, stuff like that. I remember I've drink like a whole milk and eat whole cereal, so whole package of cereal. That was my post-workout meal and stuff like that. And I believe that for those guys, it's better to have some sort of cushion because it's better to eat a little bit more than just eat not enough. And especially, I believe that it teaches those guys how to eat big. And this is a
Mm.
hard skill to teach
Yes.
and hard skill to learn, even harder to
Yes.
learn than teach, to be honest. Yeah, so
Yes.
that
I
could be
um
helpful.
I like and even before people compete, when they're newer, maybe they haven't done their first show yet. I think it's really important that you actually experience a full off season. And what does that feel like? Like, what do I feel like when I'm 30, 40 pounds above my baseline? What is that? How do I function? What things are difficult for me? Because, and the same thing with fat loss, like I generally like to take people through some kind of fat loss phase, at least moderately before they compete, because I want them to feel what happens when you're a little tired, what happens when you're a little
Yeah,
hungry, like how are you going to react? Because as soon as you do that show, if you've never actually had a proper growth phase, you're not, you're going to go into that post show period blind. I mean, you have no idea what to expect, how you're going to feel, what it's like to not be hungry or to be hungry. I mean, you don't know,
yeah.
you know?
Okay, okay, so the next question, we have to first of all um, establish how do you count your macros? Just because some guys counted it from the whole sources. So, for example, they counted the protein from the rice, pasta, and stuff like that. And some guys just counting the, like it says, animal sources. So, for example, you eat like a 300 grams of protein from meats, but in general, taking into consideration that you have 800 or 1000 grams of carbs, it's going to be probably closer to the 400 grams of protein. How do you count them?
So I generally count everything, meaning
Okay.
trace macros. So if your rice, the protein from your rice, the little bit of fat from your oat, your oats, things like that,
Okay.
it probably in lower calorie states, it probably matters less because you're going to have a lot less trace
Of
macros,
course.
like a lot less trace fats, a lot less trace proteins. But as you go up, those trace amounts go up too.
Yes.
So, like you said, if you're deep in an off season and you know, you're eating 80 grams of fat, and but you're only counting added,
Yeah.
almond butter and olive oil, but you're eating like steak. But all of a sudden, you decide you want to switch your protein source from steak to chicken, for example, or chicken to steak. I mean, the fat content, even in a lean steak, is going to be a lot more fat than chicken, for example. So, I mean, you've just instantaneously shot your fats up 30 grams a day.
Yeah.
Um, Now, if it's standardized, if it's a meal plan where the food sources are staying pretty close to the same, it probably really doesn't matter all that much because you're consistently tracking it the same way.
Of course.
Um, the only thing that I wouldn't suggest is I definitely would not. I don't know if you ever experienced this, but way back when I started, people didn't count vegetables in their macros. And
I don't. I don't count
yeah.
them still.
And now, do you stay
I,
pretty
I
consistent with the
yeah,
amounts that you
this is
take in?
why I have
Right.
something like a established amount, and I eat the same amount throughout the whole year. So
So it's
this is
consistent.
this is the same for my clients as well. I've
Yep.
write it like it's 150 to 200 grams per uh, meal or something like that, and they have to stick to that. And I specifically write what kind of vegetables, just to not
Right.
eat, for example, 200 grams of corn, because
Yeah.
this is still,
Or
yeah.
in a prep, in a prep when you're super hungry, you don't eat, a kilo of broccoli,
Yeah, I've
something.
I've been there.
Oh yeah, me too. I've done it.
Yeah,
Yep.
that's crazy. Just the broccoli and ketchup, low calorie ketchup, and that's a pretty good between the meals meal.
And your digestion doesn't like that too much.
It's not existing. You're
Sure.
basically floating around your house because you're farting so much. So yeah, but you're
Yeah.
burning a lot more calories just because the air is so dense that you have to just
You're walking
get
through the
through it.
gas in
Yeah,
the air.
yeah, yeah. So it's just it's
It's a great
zeroing out. Yeah, so
that's a
it's
great
leveling out.
theory. Yeah.
Yeah. So how much of a protein guy you are? Just because we are see the tendencies, for example, like Milos Sarcev, more is more, and then we see the guys like I don't know, for example, the Patrick Tur that or Stefan Kinsel right now, like they like to keep their protein kind of lower side. So what kind of camp you are?
I'm generally a little bit on the low to moderate side, and it's not because I don't like it's not because there's anything wrong with protein. I'm more so looking at it from a digestive standpoint.
Of course.
Um, if if you have the ability to digest more, we might go. I mean, I might not do 400 grams, but we might go a little bit higher. But what I see, and especially in the off season, is the tendency is to they tend to have better hunger, better motility between meals, meaning the meal, if you're eating every 3 hours, instead of still being full at the next meal, we can actually move that gastric emptying through the body when we keep that protein a little bit lower. And when I say lower, I'm not talking low. We're still we're still well within if we're looking at pounds, I mean we might be something in the range of one 1 gram per pound of lean body mass or something, for example. So like if I have a 300 pound or 140 kilogram bigger bodybuilder that's somewhat lean, they might only need 300 grams of protein or 275
Whoa.
even to. I mean, I have guys like I have a guy right now, he's 310 pounds lean, pro bodybuilder, IFBB, and he doesn't go over 300 grams. I mean, we stay under that. And digestion is exponentially better when we stay under
Yeah.
it. but the other thing about protein is, of course, carbs are protein sparing. The other food that you're eating is protein sparing. So it's not like I'm going to replace those calories, of course, with, carbs or fat or both. And then we get into like the gear thing. People are like, well, androgens increase protein synthesis. I'm like, yeah, they do, but they also decrease muscle protein breakdown. So you're kind of, you know what I mean? Like you're kind of
One thing,
balancing it.
could you explain the terms carbs are protein sparing? Just because this is something that I am not gonna lie, I don't understand that term.
So when we say carbs are protein sparing, really what we mean is the body's utilizing less nitrogen. So that's really what you're getting from protein, right? So you're breaking it down into amino acids. So basically, carbohydrates are protecting. I guess the easiest way to think about it is they're protecting the muscle tissue and they're protecting the nitrogen in the muscle tissue from being utilized as heavily. Does that make sense?
Yes,
So
but
like more of it's staying in the tissue.
this is not just because they obviously contains some protein, so it's like a
Well, they
complementary. So that's
well they
so
do they do of
yeah,
course, but of course carbs don't. Like rice doesn't contain a complete amino acid profile, for
yeah, but
example.
yeah, but no one eats rice only, so like the amino acids are complaining with each other, so complementary each other. So it's not that
Yeah, yeah,
important, I guess.
yeah. So you mean so what like what you're saying for the people who are listening is, of course, you're probably eating rice and maybe oats or potatoes or whatever you're getting in, and then that you're probably still getting a complete amino acid profile that way. But what we're actually talking about is the fact that the nitrogen in the muscle is being spared by eating carbohydrates. Does that make
Okay.
sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Um,
okay.
so yeah.
For me, to be honest, is super low protein, what you just said.
Oh, so I
Extremely
mentioned
low.
the 275. So for I can use myself for example. I've just because I've done everything over, I've tried everything, and granted, everyone's different, of course. Um, I have eaten. I've done 400 grams of protein, weighing 250 pounds. I've done that. My last off season, I probably had one of the better off seasons I've had in a while, and this is after bodybuilding for a long time. And my protein didn't go over. It's about 225 grams, and I was 240 plus pounds,
You still
lean,
you
like
still
relatively lean.
saying counting the trace protein
And
also.
that's counting trace as well.
Oh my God. So for me it's super low. For me, I have the least amount of protein right now ever in my life, and I'm 340 grams and I'm weighing 106 kilo right now. So this is the least amount. I'm telling you, counting from whole sources, so trace macros. So
So
it's
you're
two,
actually getting more.
two- 250 grams counting only from the meats. But normally I will never get off 300 counting only from the meats. So it's always closer to 400s. And for me, it's still not as high. So for me,
Yeah.
like I would like to keep my guys around 3 grams, 3.5 grams per kilo. So for
Pretty
100,
low.
yeah, so for 100 kilo,
Yeah.
220 guy, I would keep around 350 grams of protein, something
Yeah.
like that, but closer to the
So
400, counting from trace macros.
I'm quite a bit. I'm probably not half. I mean, definitely not half, but I'm probably at least 25% lower in most cases. Now, if they digest protein really well, we generally go a little bit higher with it. Um, so it's partially, and one of the reasons that I went down with myself was mostly digestion related.
Yeah,
Um, I do
me
have
too right
guys
now.
that eat. I mean, I do have guys that eat 1.5 grams per pound, which is closer to what you're talking about. But then the other thing is too, we're doing things like amino acids during training and stuff. So we're probably getting 20 grams of protein.
Yeah, I never even counted that.
And
I
I'm not
counted
counting
that
that either.
right now. Yeah, I counted right now. So getting off that 300, well, yeah, I'm closer to 300 grams protein right now. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. So how much fats and carbs you like to utilize during the off season? Just because some guys believe that keeping like a healthy fats a bit higher, it's improving your lipid profile and stuff like that. And I personally not, but what's your take on that?
Where I do think fats are beneficial for a couple of reasons. One is, like you said, when we're getting those monounsaturated fats and stuff in there from like avocado oil, olive oil, yeah, it's probably beneficial to lipid profile, but also fats are very calorie dense. I mean, it's the thing is,
Yeah,
if you're somebody that really, really, really has to eat a lot of food, it's a low volume way to add calories in the diet. Yeah, I mean, you can eat 1,200 grams of carbs from rice. You can do it.
of
You
course.
can, right? People have done it. I mean, I've had the highest off season I went, and I will not do this again because it actually, I didn't eat, I grew less in this off season than I did eating less food. So I'll just say that. But I was doing about 7,200 calories. I was doing 1,200 grams of carbs and 400 grams of protein, and then, over 100 grams of fat. Um, but in hindsight, me personally, I tend to do a little bit better when my calories get very high of start bumping the fats up just because I digest them well and they're very calorie dense. Like 1 gram of oil is 1 gram of fat. So it's
Yeah.
now I don't necessarily think everyone does. If I have someone that does very well on a carb dominant diet, like someone that's maybe been very thin their whole life. If you want to kind of look at like you remember the old ectomorph,
Yeah, of
remember that,
course.
like the ectomorph, mesomorph. I do notice that there are select people that probably um, were maybe very thin most of their life, very high metabolism, that do tend to do a little bit better on more carb dominant diets. But the limiting factor is usually just volume of food, right? And
Yeah.
that's where fats become helpful. Is this like, yeah, you can eat 1,200 grams of carbs, but it's just so taxing on the digestive system when you're getting up into those like when you're using a mixing bowl full
Yeah.
of full of rice. So I'll tend to add some fats in and go a little bit higher. I don't have any problem putting people over 100 grams of fat if we need to. No issues.
All sources or additional fats?
Added mostly added fats. Looking at and
Whoa.
when I'm adding fats, I'm usually if I'm adding fats beyond what's in meat, I'm usually looking at things that are going to be low volume and a little easier to digest. So oils, monounsaturated fats,
Yeah.
because yeah, you get fat from steak, but eating 12 ounces of steak or 16 ounces of steak 5 times a day is really tough to digest.
Yeah.
Um, so I'll go towards that. I also like to I'm a big fan of doing a lot of bile support. So I'll use TUDCA. I'll supplement a lot of people with TUDCA for bile salt. And we can really hammer those fats when we have a lot of bile coming into the system.
Okay. Yeah. I am not gonna shouldn't you with my opinion about that just because it's not important and we getting to the limit of our time. So, do you like to incorporate like a carb cycling or something like that? Probably some sort of training, non-training days. I mean, something like that. Probably you are not doing something like moderate, low carb, high carb. I don't know what's carb and stuff like that in the off season because it's rare.
Um, I don't as much as I used to. I used to a lot. I used to actually do quite a bit of carb cycling where I would do, a lot lower carbs on the non-training days, stuff like that. Um, I don't tend to do that as much anymore. I will rotate a little bit, but usually it'll be something simple like on non-training days, don't drink your intra-workout carbs. I mean, we're talking small amounts of cycling.
Okay.
When I get up, especially when I'm getting up into high amounts of food, I don't tend to cycle as much unless I notice that from a again, we're going to the digestion thing. From a digestive standpoint, it can be helpful to give your body a little bit of a break. The carbs, the thing to understand is that carbohydrates feed bacteria, primarily are feeding that bacteria in the gut. So it can be helpful when you're pounding down 800 grams of carbs, 1,000 grams of carbs, to have days where you're rotating them down so you're not swelling up with
Yeah.
gas from all the bacteria inside the gut. And that's why a lot of bodybuilders, male bodybuilders especially, end up with issues like small intestine bacterial overgrowth, yeast, candida, often. Um, so we can mitigate some of that stuff by cycling down. So maybe it would be something like half, like drop it in half on non-training days. I tend to leave protein and fats static, just leave those the same
Okay.
across the board and rotate down. I know some people will like increase those things on the days they bring the
Yeah.
carbs down to keep the calories up. If I'm cycling, I literally am usually just doing it because I want a digestive break. So I want less calories.
Okay.
That's the intention with
Makes
it.
sense. Makes sense. Yeah.
I personally don't think it really does anything for insulin sensitivity. Not
No,
much.
yeah,
Not really.
I don't think either, but I think it's a very good tool to actually give some sort of break for your digestion in those days. And actually, I like to keep my fats lower. I don't believe in fats for bodybuilders who are on PEDs just because I believe that when you are on PEDs, your body needs those essential fats from omega-3 and stuff like that, and those additional fats that you probably need to refill. Like for example, I've just added on the rest days, so your carbs going down, we increase your fats and you buffer your fats like intramuscular fats and stuff like that
Triglycerides,
in
yeah.
triglycerides, yes, in those days. But on the training days I keep the fats to the minimum, maybe like a 5 gram of fats, additional fats in your breakfast, and maybe like a 5 to 10 grams of fats pre-workout, and that's all for your day, nothing more. But I like to use a lot of fish oil, krill oil, and stuff like that. So you get plenty of fats from there, and also from the
Yep.
meats and stuff like that. So that's
Yeah.
normal.
And
Yeah.
are you counting the trace fats from the meats?
Yes and no. I am not counting it for my clients on their sheets, but I
Yeah.
taking I've just know that there is
Yeah.
that fats out there. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
For sure.
for their comfort I am not counting it just because I believe in like a very strict, like a just a Harris system. So you are just have like portions of, you can choose rice, potatoes,
Yeah.
and that should be this and this amount of carbs, and that's fine. So I am not tracking it that closely. I've obviously written down the example diet for them just because I believe that you have to keep your fiber intake in check and stuff like that because it's very important for your cholesterol and overall health, gut health and stuff like that, to clear out the systems and to feel well. But overall, they have a very big like room to do their changes accordingly to their digestion, of course.
Yep.
Okay, so I wanted to ask you about meal frequencies and meal amount during the days. Are you big on that? You like it more frequent meals or less frequent meals, and more meals or less meals for you guys?
I I probably usually fall more in the middle or on the lower side. most of the time. The reason for that is
So how
there's
much
limits.
meals there is?
Let's say for, and this is also dependent on the amount of foods, because when you get up into higher amounts of foods, the volume per meal is going to be difficult when you're only eating 4 meals, right? So
Yeah,
for someone that's pretty high calorie, like a male bodybuilder off season, maybe 5 would be average, with like 5 plus an intra workout.
yeah,
Um, and I think that works well for most. And the reason I like that, you can do 6, you can do 7. You know, the thing
of
is,
course.
we know from an actual growth standpoint, muscle protein synthesis, it probably doesn't matter that much. The problem, I think, comes into play of, from a practical application standpoint, schedule. It's a lot easier to eat 5 than it is 7 if you have a corporate job where you have to
Of
sit in meetings
course.
all day. You know, the other thing is, gastric emptying between meals and motility of food between meals only moves so quickly. So when you eat 7 meals a day, yes, you will digest the food. By the time you wake up the next day, it is digested. But the problem is, by the time you're 2 or 3 meals in, you're just stacking food on top of
Yeah,
food. The last meal is probably only 50% digested at that point, when they're getting big, right? When the calories are getting high. So we need to find a balance between what is less stressful from a schedule standpoint and what actually allows you to digest from meal to meal to meal. And I find that around 5 works well in higher calories. I even had people that do 4 in lower calorie situations. Um, but the only problem with 4, when you're eating 6,000 calories, is that's
yeah,
1,500 calories a meal. And that's going to be a lot of food volume.
yeah, of course. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, great. What about the cheat meals in the off season? Do you allow your clients for some, or do you like to keep it for a special occasion? So, for example, like someone has a birthday or something like that.
If we're talking, I mean, if we're talking again, if we're talking like male bodybuilders, the thing is, when you're not, and this is what anyone that's eaten a lot of food understands this, you just generally don't care that much about cheat meals when you're like sick of food.
Yeah,
So you'll eat it. You'll go out, you'll have the you know, if you want the pizza, if you want the burger, if you want the sushi, you know, whatever, but you're probably not that prone to overeating when your appetite's very, very low, right? So I don't care. If you want to have a cheat meal, I don't really worry too much when calories are high, because A, the likelihood of them overeating is a lot lower because their appetite's so low. And two, their base calories are so high that
yeah,
the free meal is not really going to throw them as far over that as it normally would. My only issue with it is, if you go out and have a really highly processed, highly inflammatory free meal, you really got to be careful when you time it, because if you do it in the
yeah,
middle of the day, your meals are fucked for the rest of the day. Like, you're done. You're probably not even going to be hungry for the rest of the day. So if we're gonna do it, maybe the night, maybe like last meal of the day would be helpful towards the end of the day, um, just so you have some time to let that digest before, you know, your next day's meal. I know when my calories get high, we'll go out to eat and stuff, and I'm like, I don't. I mean, I'll eat it. I'll eat the
yeah.
free meal, but I just don't care, you know. But
Okay,
when you're
yeah,
hungry, you'll eat anything, and you tend to overeat. Um, now, the one thing to keep in mind too is, with women or people that eat less calories, having frequent free meals will definitely impact your body composition in the off season. I do believe that, and I, just because if you only eat, so if you're a female, for example, and you only eat 2,200 calories, and you go out and have 1,500 calories in one meal, and you do that twice a week, you're going to gain body fat faster. That's just, I
yeah,
mean, now, it's not to say that I don't want them to not have a life
of course.
and not have a social life, but at the same time, you really have to understand how that free meal is going to impact you, based on how much you're eating, what is your digestion, you know, so on and so forth.
Yeah, of course, of course. So, what about the mini cuts? because this is like a popular trend right now that everyone just doing the mini cuts in between the off-season periods. Rather it's needed or not, do you believe in mini cuts? Do you set it in your, I don't know, time frame, or do you like to use it in a specific situations? For example, someone's just have no appetite, so you just lower the calories for some period, or just gain too much of the body fat, so you like to trim it a little bit down, or something like that.
If the off season's not that long, maybe you competed in last year. Maybe you're a pro bodybuilder, maybe you're a national level bodybuilder where you're trying to hit that show and get that pro card. I doubt that you're going to need a mini cut in that off season when it's only 8 months. But in really long off seasons, I do think most people at some point will probably benefit from it because, again, like we said before, you get too fat, you get too insulin resistant, you can't eat anymore, whatever it is. I think where it's very context based. How long that mini cut is will largely depend on the need. If you're needing to do 4 month mini cuts in your off season, you got too fat. Like that's just the thing is you probably got too fat. You probably got too insulin resistant. You probably went too far. Um, Now, if you need to do 8 weeks, for example, and you want to do kind of like, I know some people like the rapid style mini cuts where they'll come in pretty hard and kind of just get
Yeah,
in and get out. Sure, it can be a great way to resensitize digestion, get the blood glucose under control, get the lipid profile fixed, so on and so forth. But you shouldn't, if you're needing 4 and 5 month mini cuts in there, you
yeah,
probably got too
of
fat.
course. But 5 months is not a mini cut; it's a
No, that's
full-blown
a fucking prep.
diet. Yeah. Okay, so what about the cardio in the off season? Do you like to keep your guys doing it, or do you not believe in cardio in the off season?
More recently, I leave cardio in for most people in small amounts. I used to with my really really high calorie eaters. I used to go no cardio as a way to reduce energy expenditure. I find, and I've tried it both ways, I find that a little bit of cardio does help. I mean, some people say it helps their appetite. Um, it probably does help from an insulin sensitivity standpoint. But the one thing I like to do with males, especially that get heavy in the off season, that get pretty heavy, is when we do cardio, we're not doing a lot. We're maybe only doing 20 minutes, but I actually want them to get their heart rate up a little bit
Yeah,
because we're getting some cardiovascular benefit from that. That way, when they're going in the gym and they're doing that heavy, those heavy multi joint movements, they're not having to stop because they can't breathe.
of course. Yeah,
Yeah. So I think that's helpful from a endurance, like an endurance standpoint as well.
yeah. Okay. So what about the PEDs in the off season? What's your go-to compounds for off season?
Most people, I mean, I truly believe that most people will probably be able to maximize their potential with 4 compounds. And I'll most of the time. And I'm not saying you can't add additional, and sometimes I do. But those 4 compounds are probably like, what are the staples? Testosterone,
Of course.
probably some kind of DHT, masteron, or primobolan, right? Growth hormone, and probably insulin. And
Great.
you are probably going to be able to, because really PEDs are mostly dose dependent. I mean, the dose is the stimulus. Yeah, you can add little bits of nandrolone, people, if you do well with it. Yes, you can use a little bit of trenbolone. Yes, I mean, it's not that you can't. It's just that the dose is really going to be dictated. 2 grams of gear with any compound is probably going to be stronger than 1 gram of gear with any compound.
Yeah, I'm smiling just because I remember Justin Harris' answer on this question. In the off season, he doesn't really care what you put into the syringe as long as the milligrams per week it's in the level he wanted to. And I believe in that. Yeah. I I
That's
I am. I'm really laughing out loud when I saw like the guys were looking for the special combination, something like that. Whatever makes you feel great and keeps you in a good shape, good mood, they have not problems, mentally and stuff like that. Stick it to that, and you don't even have to switch it or something like that. You can run it throughout your whole career, like a 20 years
Well,
of primal.
I mean,
Yeah,
I've had people, I've literally had people 300 pounds that run test, mast, GH, and insulin. Now,
yeah,
granted, their dose, granted, their total
yeah.
dose is higher than someone that weighs
Of
180
course, of
pounds.
course.
But again, the dose you find, like you said, you find the compounds that you feel good on and you function on. You can sleep, and you're not pissed
Yeah,
off,
of
you know.
course.
And then you escalate dose based on your need.
Okay. What about the GH in the off-season? Do you believe that more is more, or you like more like a guy who thinks that three IUs are enough, or no more than six IU or something like that?
I do generally think more is more up to a point.
Yeah,
Where that becomes, I mean, cost could be a problem,
yeah,
accessibility and cost. But let's say that cost is not a factor. Let's say that they can afford as much as you want. Um, we don't have the problem with GH is we don't have a ton. We have a little bit of research on it. We kind of know that after a certain dose, the limiting factor is probably going to be how much IGF you're able to release in one dose.
yeah,
Which is so if we're going higher dose, if we're doing 8 IUs, 10 IUs, we're probably going to spread it out into maybe two to 4 unit dosing, like 2 to 4 IUs at a time, spread throughout the day. Um, but yeah, I mean, I do tend to think because visually, I mean, look if you look at someone that takes 4 and you look at someone that takes 10, it
yeah.
generally,
That's
I mean, now some of that's fluid, right? Some of that is just fluid retention in the tissue. Um, but same thing in prep. Look at someone that utilizes more growth hormone, and you'll even in the same individual, if you give them 2 IUs and you give them 6 IUs, I have a hard time arguing with the visual difference that you
yeah,
see. The only problem in the off season, of course, is at some point 10 IUs is probably going to wreck your glucose level because you're already eating. If you're already pounding 1,200 grams of carbs, I only really get concerned if we're needing 100 units of insulin a day or something. I'm like,
yeah.
we might have to back that down a little bit.
Okay, okay. And do you believe that you have to take some sort of breaks from the GH?
Not really. I
Yeah, screw it. I run 10 IUs, 365 days a year, and never had a single problem with my glucose, to be honest, just because I keep a close eye on that. So, yeah,
yeah,
I don't
I
believe in either.
yep.
Okay, so what about the insulin in the off season? You like to utilize the insulin only around the training when some guys using, for example, GH, or you sometimes use like a basal insulin as well?
I prefer basil most of the time.
Okay.
Um, I've had people use both at the same time. Um, Basil's more convenient. Obviously, I mean it's easier to use. My We know that like Lantus, for example, might have a little bit extra benefit in terms of um,
IGF-1, yeah,
like
especially.
IGF-1 activity.
Yeah,
So does that really make a difference? I don't know how much of a difference that's really going to make in application. But the thing with basil again is it's more convenient, and I'm also someone that generally doesn't use when we go high carb in the off season. I usually don't do really heavy carb timing, so I will generally have people eat carbohydrates throughout the day in
yeah.
meals. So if we're doing 5 meals, we might go a little heavier around training, but I'm probably going to be pretty high carb in all 5 meals, which is where we would use a basal insulin. Now, if we're doing more specific carb timing, like heavy intra workout timing, lots of GH before training, something like that, we might use a Humalog or Novolog
Okay.
or something in that case
So you are using basal insulin more than, for example, one to
more
two
often.
times? Oh, okay.
No, no, no.
Per
If we're
week, per
using
week.
so frequency of basal, we're probably once a day.
Yeah, but how many times in a week?
Most of the time, if we're doing carb cycling, it may be only on training days, but I mean, I have people that do it every day as well if their carbs are high all the
Okay.
time.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I would say this, I really like to pay attention to the dosing though, because I know if that need for insulin is getting really, really, really high, we're
Yeah.
losing insulin sensitivity at that point. Because someone could say, "Hey, my glucose is 85." I'm like, you can control your glucose forever. You just
Yeah.
keep taking more, but you're still insulin resistant, right?
Yeah, but your fasted insulin is creeping
It's yeah, it's like 40,
yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. So, how do you like to keep your guys on the estrogen part? Just because some trainees think that it's better to have a higher estrogen or believe in the estrogen to testosterone ratio. What's your belief in that?
More often than not, I prefer to let it get higher if they don't have side effects from it.
Could you explain why?
Meaning, um, from a muscle growth standpoint, partitioning nutrient partitioning standpoint, even some cardiovascular benefit from estrogen as well. But when I say high, I'm not running. I can't think of a scenario where I would run like 2 grams of testosterone with no DHT or no. So I would say that on a higher end might be somebody that's doing like if they're using 800 or a gram of test and they're doing maybe a very low amount of a DHT, 200, 400 milligrams, something like that. That's probably higher of in terms of estrogen to androgen ratio.
Yeah,
But a lot of people just can't. I mean, at a point, they're going to start feeling shitty,
yeah,
or if they have gyno, if they're prone to gyno, that's going
yeah,
to be a
of
problem.
course.
Um, I would like to go higher as long as we don't need an AI. I prefer to try to minimize that as much as possible.
Okay. So what about the AI? Do you use it, or do you believe that the DHT derivative is enough to keep the estrogen in control?
I don't need it. Most often, I don't need it. You can just, like you said, you can change the ratio of test and DHT. If now, I would say this: if someone is just generally very very sensitive to estrogen to the point where they're taking a gram of primo and 100 milligrams of testosterone or something, I mean that's a little ridiculous.
Yeah, of course.
In that case, we might use a very low dose of an
Okay.
AI to try to bring that bring that test dose up a little bit. I mean, but I most people
An estradiol or XMSN is your preferred choice.
Aromasin usually.
Okay, okay, XMSN. Okay. Okay, so how do you manage the blood pressure with your guys? Do you like to use some sort of like a telmisartan, or do you believe in more like natural ways, like I don't know, increase the cardio, or just I don't know, like some people use a AAKG, or some guys use a high amount of garlic and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's natural supplements that help. Garlic, systemic enzymes, nattokinase, serrapeptase. They can help to some
Arjuna,
extent.
yeah,
Arjuna is great. Um, Telmisartan is relatively safe as
yeah,
well as a baseline. I mean, I have no, I have nothing against using telmisartan if needed, but another thing that people can do too is even electrolytes can
yeah.
help in that
Increase the
way.
potassium.
Yeah, a little bit higher potassium in the diet can help because when you're eating off season and you're not getting many fruits and vegetables in as much as you should, you're really eating a pretty low potassium diet a lot of the
Yeah.
time. So even just adding some potassium into the diet will help bring the blood pressure down a bit. Cardio helps. Um, Kidney. I mean, really, you got to keep the kidneys healthy. If
Yeah,
you
of
have
course.
if
Struggles.
yeah, if the renal function is off, that's where you're going to run into most of your issues with blood pressure. So keeping an eye on renal function, cystatin C levels, EGFR,
Oh,
kidney EGFR, bonding creatinine aren't the most accurate markers when you're really big. Cystatin C is probably a little bit better, but you got to keep the kidneys healthy.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Yeah.
Okay, Austin, we are gonna finish here just because we
Yeah.
are get through the off-season questions and we are actually 10 minutes past your limit. So yeah, I wanted to thank you big time for
Yeah.
just
Thank you.
joining me. I know that you're a busy man, so I'm not gonna keep you for longer. For everyone who sticks with us to the end to this podcast, I would love you to subscribe, to comment down below, and obviously to check it out, the social media of the Austin. And I will gonna write down everything that you need to know down in the description box below. So yeah, thank you so much, and
Thank you.
just wishing you the great rest of the day, just because it's pretty early out down there. Yeah.
Yeah. We have lots of day left here.
Great. So keep a good work, and I'm gonna text you once again. And if you find some spare time, we can do the contest prep and the
Yeah.
transition into the peak week and stuff like that. Thank you so
Perfect.
much,
Thank you.
and have a nice day.
Yeah. Talk to you soon. Thank you.